Betty Davis said famously, old age, it ain't no place for sissies. And I would venture to say that caregiving also ain't no place for sissies. In November of 2016, our country went through a major shift. That was the first time in our history that we are now over 50 million seniors, 50 million people over the age of 65. And for me, that is a big number. I'm thinking, okay, wow, it's 50 million people. But I think the bigger thing is the visual that goes along with that, that if all those people were to hold hands, they'd wrap around the world twice. It's like, wow. It's kind of unimaginable. It's like, you can't even really wrap your brain around it. But yet, 56% of us say we're not even talking to our parents about home care or planning or anything else. We're not talking about it. And 20% of us are scared to death and just want to run home and like throw the covers over our heads and go, I can't deal with this. And I get it, but that's not a good thing. Well, 15% of us don't want to talk to our parents because they're afraid they're going to get the door slammed in their face, or their folks are going to say, this is none of your business, I don't want to talk about that right now. And that might happen. True story, could happen. So what I know about caregiving is it's not a linear experience. My name is Kelli Bradley, and I have 20 years experience in senior care, both personally and professionally. And I founded the Devoted Daughter to really bring you and your families the resources in a way that you could absorb that and use that information. So what I'd like to do today is talk to you in a little bit more detail about the future of aging, options for care, and also the circle of care. The idea behind all of this is, how do you plan what's relevant for you and your family? There's so much information out there. There was a lot of information when I was caregiving for my family as well, but there's even more now. And you get a diagnosis or something happens, and the first thing you do is like Google it. Okay, what am I going to do? And it's too much. You don't know what to do. How does this apply to me? And how do I use this information responsibly? So 1 in 5 Americans cares for an adult family member today. And it's just, when you start to think of how common this is, and this is something that people don't always talk about. So these forums and these groups are really important to connect all of you. 90% of them are family members, and 43% are under the age of 45. And this stat it was a little bit shocking to me, because you just don't think of younger people as being caregivers. But when you think about that statistic and who it's affecting, those people really are the new sandwich generation. They've got young kids, they've got parents, and a lot of times grandparents still. So they're getting really pushed from all sides. Let's talk about those people who are 65 and older. 9 out of 10 people over the age of 65 will have one chronic condition. And what do I mean by that? I'm talking about arthritis, hypertension, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, stroke, or maybe some kind of dementia. And oftentimes they have 2 or more of these chronic conditions. So I wanted to chat with you a little bit about my story. So this is my mom, Betty, here on the left. And she was a really active mom, was involved in the PTA, ran around, make sure our parties were perfect. She was just a regular, awesome mom. Loved her 3 kids, loved being a part of a family. And one year, we called the 3 Ds in our family. It was death of her father, divorce, and diabetes. And those 3 things happened in that same year, and she just never recovered from that. Not because she didn't want to recover, but really because the stress and the disease took a toll on her health that she just couldn't bounce back from. So over the years as a family, we supported her and did whatever we could do to help her and to try to figure it out. And I think if you could take away one thing from my experience, the thing that I regret and still haunts me today, is that I didn't spend enough time as a daughter. I was the doer person. And you gotta be careful with that, because that's sort of in my DNA. I'm the person who's like organizing this, picking this up, cleaning the house, going and getting pretty plants, making sure that everything's squared away. But I sort of lost the relationship with my mom as her daughter, and I became the #1 chief. well, what do we need to do? Well, just call Kelli. I don't know, call Kelli. And, it happens quickly and you just don't even realize it. It's interesting because I owned an in-home care company, and later into the in-home care company, someone asked me, well, how long, have you been doing this? And I said, well, I've been doing it for like 8 years, but the first 3 years I really wasn't engaged in it because I had personal things going on. And one of my coworkers said to me, you were a caregiver. And I went, what? I mean, it's like I have been doing everything you can possibly imagine that has to do with caregiving, but yet I didn't realize that I was a caregiver. So I want you all to think about those things. What are things that other people can do to contribute to make your life easier so that you can take that time with your family? On the other side is my gram. So my gram lived 2 days before her 100th birthday. And when we lost my mom, it was horrible. It's not natural to lose a child. So she started to kind of go downhill and need more care and attention, and we ended up having to move her. But when we made that decision for her to move, when she made the decision that she needed to move, I said to my uncle, this is not going to be the same as it was with Mom. I'm not going to be giving her a bath. I'm not going to be changing Depends. I want to be her granddaughter. This is, we've had this relationship for all these years, and I don't want to lose that now. So we hired caregivers, and we got people in there early, and it wasn't without pushback. She was always like, Kelli Ann, she had her finger like right in my face, right up, and I was like, but Graham, so lots of times she'd send people home or shoo them away or piss them off so they never wanted to come back, but we got through it. So I wanted you all to consider what your story is and what brought you here today. Not that anybody has to raise their hand, but just we all have a story. We've all got families and we've all had experiences that we can share with one another and support one another as people are going through the caregiving process. And it's interesting, as you're out in the community, as you're home, walking into your garage with your phone right here, sometimes we don't realize that we have neighbors that can use our help. We have people at the grocery store that can use help with a cart. One of the things that my mom used to do, and I notice people doing this a lot, is using the grocery cart like as a stability tool, as a walker. And my mom was young, so the walker was a stigma. She didn't want to be associated with the walker. I don't need the walker. I'm like, Mom, people don't know you can't see. Like, we're in Costco, and she's like really around with this walker, and kids are like, Rawr! I'm like, no one knows. They don't realize you can't see. But if you had the walker, they would sort of know, like, okay, we need to create some space here. I don't know if you've heard the term silver tsunami, but there's lots of different terms for the aging process. And one of the things that I want you all to consider is get ahead of the wave. Don't stay behind the wave. And the way you can do that is through education, seminars like this, speaking to one another, learning more about what you need to do going forward so that you have a good plan. And there's a new dementia diagnosed once every 3.2 seconds, and that's actually a worldwide statistic, but it's still scary. And I wanted to pause just for a moment about dementia. There's confusion a lot of times. The term Alzheimer's and dementia are used or interchanged. Dementia is actually the syndrome. It's not a diagnosis. So Alzheimer's is just the most common form of dementia. There are 80-something different kinds of dementia. So it's important to get the right diagnosis and to get the right information and not just loosey-goosey interchange those terms. 1.5 million people expected to have a heart attack and 1.4 million diagnosed with diabetes. So, we need to get ahead of that wave. For action plans, the earlier the better. And I'm going to go through just a couple signs that you want to look for if someone's struggling with these things. Meals are a big one. It's hard to cook for one person. Sometimes it's even hard to cook for 2 people. I mean, I feel like, okay, I've just got too much food here and I'm throwing things away. So I understand the struggle. The other thing with meals is a lot of times it's a social event. It's something where you bonded and it's a traditional thing. You break bread with people. So it's nice to be able to sit down and enjoy a meal together. Hygiene is something else that might be failing, especially if there's a dramatic change. Somebody's always been a certain way and then there's a change in that. Weight loss or gain, quirks, changes in status. Maybe it's mental status, maybe it's just confusion, function, mental illness. And mental illness is something that is kind of an interesting subject. Years ago, mental illness was not diagnosed at an early age. So what we're starting to see now is some folks who are struggling with mental illness have always struggled with mental illness. It just was never diagnosed. And now it's appearing, it's more pronounced. So that's just, you know, it's always a question that I ask people, has your mom always been this way? Has this always been a problem? It's like, well, yeah, she was like this a lot, but now it's worse. Safety. Failure to thrive is a term that basically means somebody's just given up. Like, I don't want to eat anymore, I don't care, I'm failing to thrive. I can't even motivate myself to put one foot in front of the other. The family meeting is a challenge. Figure out, first of all, who belongs in the family meeting. I've heard over the years people say, especially this time of year, it's like, oh, it's Thanksgiving, we're all going to be home, this would be a great time to talk to mom and dad about moving. I'm like, not a good plan. No. That's not the greatest thing to do. Maybe mom and dad don't want to move, and the last thing you need to do is spring it on somebody. I mean, put yourself in your parents' shoes. So I also feel like having the talk with them is something that you need to sit down and spend time and listen to what they want. Don't just walk in and assume. Mom, what are you hoping for? What do you think is gonna, what's your plan? Finances are always the touchy one, but oftentimes over the years I've found that people don't know what their parents' financial situation is. They don't know if they have long-term care insurance. There's just a lot of unknowns. And exploring your options. What's available? Maybe it's not appropriate right now, but what's available down the road and what makes the most sense for you? Walter is a gentleman that I worked with a few years ago, and he had never been married. He had a good relationship with his nephews, went to the corner bar pretty much every day, had lunch, chit-chatted with his cronies, and one day he fell, broke his hip. The reason he fell was because his blood pressure dropped, so he had a heart problem. Long story short, went into a skilled facility, could not wait to get the heck out of there. He was like, I want to go home. So we got him home, but home wasn't home anymore because there was Kelli, there was a caregiver, there was a nurse, there was a social worker. Somebody was there with him 24 hours a day, and he's like, I can't take it. It wasn't the same environment. The other thing that happens when people discharge from a skilled facility, or what might have been called years ago a nursing home, is that they don't realize how much help they had at their fingertips until they get home and there's nobody there. So in this case, Walter actually ended up moving because he was so disturbed by the fact that he had to have somebody there 24 hours a day. And the point to this story is there are things you can do in advance, and talking about things earlier, or getting somebody comfortable with having help, even if it's from a family member or a niece or nephew. Something is better than nothing. Emergency checklist is available on our blog post. The other thing that's important is, and we've kind of touched on this, but you're not alone. There's millions of caregivers in the US. So reaching out, lending an ear to a friend, even being like an accountability partner. So what's right for you? What are the options? 90% of people say they want to stay home. That's a big number. And I think that oftentimes we jump to, okay, well, if you want to stay home, it's only going to be for a few months. But I would encourage you to think about what are things you can do at the home. Can you make the home safer? Are there things that can be modified? Are there things that can be changed? Are there shelves that can be lowered, instead of having someone climb up to get something? 90% of falls occur in and around the bathroom. Are there modifications we can use in the bathroom? Are there things we can implement in the home with technology like Alexa? Outside the home, senior centers, are a great socialization tool. I'll tell you that the lack of companionship can be just as detrimental as diabetes and heart disease and those other chronic conditions that we listed earlier. So it's really important to keep the socialization piece up. And senior centers often, I know in our community, they actually provide transportation as well. So I've had clients that have really enjoyed getting on the bus, going over to the senior center. They might even do trips to the grocery store or different activities. I mean, not everybody is a cruise ship person, so not everybody's gonna like having these structured activities, but for folks who enjoy it, it's a great option. Adult daycare is another one. They've started recently combining children and adults in the same center so that the adults can interact with the kids. On your tables, you'll find these little cards, and you might be wondering what the heck they are. And these cards are just questions that we put together. We call them the family flashcards, and we put them together to encourage children and families to talk to older adults and communicate face-to-face, one-to-one. Independent living is just what it says, independent living. There's not a lot of services there, typically meals and a roof over your head and limited transportation, organized events as well. Assisted living, and these two, the next section that we're going to talk about, they can be located on one campus type environment or individual building structures. Assisted living is a step up from the independent piece, and really the more help you need, the more it costs, is essentially it in a nutshell. Skilled care, or what you might have heard nursing home type care, typically happens with people who need to discharge from a hospital, don't have anyone at home, or they're a medically complex case like my mom's. There was just absolutely no way we could bring her home from the hospital without having her have a stint in rehab, that extra support, getting her strong enough so that she could operate independently at home and safely. Memory care is for cognition issues. It's a lockdown unit. It can also live in this campus environment. And what's interesting about this is oftentimes couples especially, there might be a spouse in memory care and somebody else in assisted living, but they're in close proximity to one another so they can visit and still stay in touch. Foster care is an option. It's not for everybody, but it's a private home environment, and typically there's 4 to 6 bedrooms. Sometimes you share a room, sometimes you don't, it just depends. But all of these things are things that you would need to visit, talk to people, consider. It's just, you can't pick it, you can't just take a stab at it and hope it's gonna work. My grandma said to me a million times, well, this is fine if you like this kind of living. It's just fun, but this is not my thing. And, honestly, it's not my thing either. I'm not that kind of a person. So it was a really difficult transition for her. So who's on your team? The circle of care is something that you'll find at the Devoted Daughter. And the point to all this is to really think ahead. A lot of times people will say, well, I don't have anyone to call. I don't know. I don't have the resources. But this is a process that we put together at Devoted Daughter to help you dig into that a little bit more. At the center of your circle are always the people you call in the middle of the night. So your siblings, family friends, and family members. And anyone else. This is an individual thing. One of the things that evolved, I should say, with my mom and her care is that I found people in the circle of care that I didn't think were going to be there. There were people I didn't expect to be there. There were hairdressers. There were, nail techs. There were people that, neighbors, people that I just didn't expect would show up in that, crisis. And other people that I thought were going to be there weren't there. So I think that this is an important exercise, and it's not just a one-time thing. So right now we're talking really about the personal circle of care, but there are other circles. There's a technology circle, which would include things like Alexa. There's also a professional resources circle, which would include education and other events. So in the next evolution of this, you've got professionals and community. One of my mom's physicians, and kind of back to that internet piece, the internet piece is important. because it helps to educate you and it helps you to present yourself and show up as an educated, thoughtful person, but it's just a piece of the pie. So finding those professionals and people that you can bounce ideas off of is vitally important. And if your doctor isn't willing to do it, find someone who is willing to do it. And I'm so grateful my mom had some excellent physicians, and at one point there were 47 of them. So it was really hard. It's a lot to know, it's a lot to take in. You learn by doing. And I remember calling Dr. Murray at 10:30 at night going, hey, my brother David heard from somebody at OHSU about this, and my other brother who's a doctor heard about this, and what do you think about it? And just trying to problem solve with him. And he'd say, yes, that's a good idea, or no, it's not going to work because of X, Y, and Z. But the human body is a complex machine. So we've got doctors, social workers, church members, and friends. And social workers can also be in your doctor's office. A lot of people don't consider that, but I think as we move towards this bundled care environment, you're going to see a lot more of these kinds of folks trying to coordinate care, reduce costs before you get to the physician. So it's important to ask if they have a social worker on staff, if they have a counselor on staff, who are these people, how can they help you? Call them, introduce yourself, and find out, how can you help me? Do you coordinate with other doctors? How does the information flow from one doctor to another? That's really important, especially if you're seeing a specialist. How does the information from the specialist get back to the primary care? Whose responsibility is that? And how does my mom know about this? And how do we know about it as a family so she gets the best possible care? Church members, and I think church members or community members are just people that you're friendly with and have known you for years. I mean, so many times, we discount those relationships that are more casual, but a lot of times people are like, I'll help, I'll volunteer, what do we need to do? Does somebody need a meal? Does someone need a ride? And friends, of course. So on the very outside of the circle, even the mailman. So one of my clients, Pat, she had dementia, and she was a very wealthy woman, but after her husband died, she pretty much isolated herself. And the mailman found her face down on the floor. So she was taken in, she ended up with a G-tube and pretty complex medical situation. So when she got out of the hospital, she went to a skilled nursing facility, and then she went to assisted living. And she said, I'm not staying here, I'm leaving. So she got her bag of tricks and she went home and had very little family that she'd ever interact with. Her house was a hoarding mess. And here she had this G-tube and medications and dementia and couldn't manage any of it. So we ended up taking care of her 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for about 3 years. But if it hadn't been for that mailman, she would have been in trouble right away. Coworkers. I think a lot of times, we don't want to talk about our personal information with our coworkers. But there's a time and a place. It's not always appropriate, but there are folks that are there for you. Also, there's programs that are offered within our company, the companies we work for, EAP programs or other solutions that can allow us access to care, even home care. Master task lists. At the Devoted Daughter, we've got task lists, we've got videos, we've got blog posts. So the information is designed to be presented to you in a number of different ways. So I know that you can't always listen to a video or have time to listen to a video, but you can print a task list, or you can look at something when your phone's on silent and get the information you need when you need it. This is a crazy little picture. So I put this in here because my gram wrote me a little letter, and she's writing about, so a lot of times on Sundays I would have family dinners, and we go get my gram or we do whatever. So we'd get as many people as, everybody who wanted to come could come. And so my gram sends me this little note, and at the bottom she says, signed, the three lovelies. And I'm like, right? Yeah, nice crazy picture. So again, I'm Kelli Bradley. Here's my contact information. You all have my business card.